What up, y'all? MC Snax here. Welcome back to Hatchet Chat. This is episode 32. As you can see, Voltron is still assembled. We got the Hatchet Chat OG with us. Lars, how you doing today, bro?
I've been looking forward to this all day. Our last episode weirdly had like a lot of engagement. I don't know if it's weird. Like sometimes it takes a while, but like the fact that we did a new record, it's not like we get like huge millions of views, but when you break 1,000 in a day, it's like it's dope.
So, absolutely. It was a pleasant surprise. And we just thank all the homies out there supporting us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, that was awesome to get that much engagement, right off the bat. And we hope you guys enjoyed that episode. And yes, I've also been looking forward to this episode. It's been a long time coming. As you guys can see by the title, we are doing the Juggalo Classic Tales from the Lotus Pod. This is the ABK version. We're actually doing the original Marz version on this episode, but this is the only copy of the album I have physically. And this is such a significant album for so many reasons. I mean, there's so much to talk about. ICP, well, Dark Lotus in its entirety goes deep with the occult references, and there's a lot to dive into there. It's also a significant album because of, it's a really big transitioning period for psychopathic records for multiple reasons. And I couldn't do it without Lars, because Lars, it's one of your favorites from psychopathic of all time, no?
Yeah, this Malenko's my favorite, but this is definitely my second favorite thing they ever did. And I'm specifically a fan of the Marz version.
Word.
I know you did a song with ABK and he's your boy. But Marz is just like the wild card on this record. This album came out on July 17th, 2001, which was like less than 2 months before a really historical date. And there's a song, Juggalo Family, where the chorus, mass murder makes me happy. And like 9/11 was a huge like example of mass murder in American history. And I remember I was listening to this with my friend Tim, and he was like, do you think ICP are glad that 9/11 happened if mass murder makes them happy? And we were like, no. I have a lot of memories of this album in this weird time in my life where after I finished high school, before I started college, and like one of my last like pre 9/11 memories. But this album has like this haunting, dark vibe to it, but it's also beautifully produced and has some like clear, wonderful moments of clarity. And I think a lot about Don Quixote with this. And Don Quixote is a character that Cervantes created in the early 17th century. And it was one of the first examples of a novel. And the theme of the gap between what drives reality and what drives illusion is the central element of Don Quixote's plot. Like, I feel like we talked about him on the show, but he's famous for having like running at windmills, thinking that they're dragons, right? That's like a metaphor for doing something that's kind of misguided, the gap between reality and illusion. And in part two, what's interesting about Quixote is in part two, the second book, Don Quixote had become such a popular Spanish archetype that authors were doing like bootleg versions of his story. He was like, it's like a fan fiction about Don Quixote. So in the sequel, he finds the false Don Quixote. Don Quixote as a character knows that he's a famous character, and he comes and confronts him for being the false version of himself. And it makes me think about this because like this is the record where like the magic of the dark carnival and the metaphor of God being the dark carnival really is put to the test, because in Behind the Paint, he talks about how he was lost and abandoned and gained so much weight without the power of the Six Jokers card. And so this is an example of like all the darkness that's on the other side of the metonymy of the dark carnival manifesting itself in this project that had to get re-released, that had a lot of like issues, that was released months before, just 2 months before like a horrible national tragedy. And so the line between fantasy and fiction is blurred. But later ICP would confront half the group as like the fake bootleg versions of like the psychopathic brand. And I think that ties into the Don Quixote sequel as well. A few months ago, I did a con, Too Many Games in outside of Philly. And it just so happened we were on the same show as Twiztid. And I was backstage And I saw their set list and I was like, yo, they're playing Headache because Blaze was there. And
Right.
I was so stoked to see it. But like, it's crazy how the Magic Ninja Camp still does like this Psychopathic Riders stuff, still does the Dark Lotus stuff, when this really is a project of solidarity and ICP trying to put their boys on and trying to create something new and really trying to double down on what does it mean to ride for the karmic spiritual elements of the Dark Carnival. So it's a heavy record for me. And I remember the summer before I started college, my ex-girlfriend and I from high school were up at Lake Tahoe, and she had to fly home to start high school, and I had to stay, and then I was starting college. And I remember there's a photo of me. I walked to the gate with her, because back then you could walk to the gate with someone without flying before 9/11. And I was standing looking at the gate, and there was a sign on the window that my dad took. It said, if you love someone, give them wings and let them fly. And it's a picture of me looking like saying goodbye to that chapter of my life, because we knew we were going in different directions. And shortly after, there was a fire up in California. Like, there were more fires starting to happen. We had to evacuate, and we spent the week in LA with our family. The point of the story is that we went to the record store when we were in LA during this break, and I found the CD, and I listened to it constantly during that week, and constantly, like, as I processed this like pain of leaving high school, not knowing what college was going to bring. So it had a special place in my heart, because it was like, you know how sometimes music can really do something to you that like makes something that feels really hard and scary feel better. This dark record helped me exercise my demons, and like was really, really special to me, and really like was like my last memory of my high school years, kind of like my youth, you know, not that I was old in college, but like it's like the bookend to that chapter. That's why I love this record.
That's amazing. And we've talked briefly about this record. I knew you loved it so much, but even I did. We never spoke about this in depth. So like my wig is flipped too, man. And, you know, they definitely deal with crazy themes. I mean, with that lyric, you know, mass murder makes me happy. I mean, to someone who's not into horror themed rap, it could be hard to justify, you know. It's a form of entertainment that is, you know, deals with incredibly morbid things. But I think you're right. Like, there's a catharsis behind it. You know what I mean? Whether it's dealing with negative emotions or, you know, exercising some of those proverbial demons, you know, and this album definitely has that ability. In my opinion, this is personally, I find this like the scariest album in Psychopathic Records' discography. I don't think it's as explicitly violent as Hell's Pit or explicitly graphic as Hell's Pit when it comes to its imagery, but just how deep and legitimate the occult references are on it. And we'll get into it. They were talking about this in the lead up to the record. How, you know, they were referencing like actual incantations from like black magic books. Yeah. You know, Marz had experience in that background. He later became a born again Christian, which we can talk about. But at this time he had, you know, a lot of resources. They used that. And again, that comes back to what you were talking about, crossing it. You know, they're holding the line between, fantasy and reality, because I think that they call on those things for entertainment purposes. I mean, there's a seance, instructions for a seance in the back of the album, but that's not on the OG one. I think it's in the tray. I could be wrong. Okay, it's not on the back. I think it's in the tray of the of the original. And again, like, I don't think Dark Lotus wants to get anybody in trouble when it comes to like dealing with these spiritual powers. I think they do it for entertainment purposes, similar to their influence Esham, using satanic imagery for entertainment purposes. But if you do believe in, you know, a higher power, a benevolent power, then you might believe that some of these powers have weight too. And you know, we'll get into the mysticism on this album, the East meets West, esoteric versus exoteric. There's so much to talk about. It was just like such a wig blowing record, and the fact that like the track listing wasn't on the original record, like it's like what is this? It's like how they felt when they discovered Esham. Like, they didn't know what the heck was beyond this thing. So 2001, we had to go on this like wilderness expedition, the seniors in high school. And
my friend ICP came to town, and it was that week where Weird Al, Wesley Willis, and ICP had all played like in California, and I missed all those shows that week, which was a bummer. But it's all good. But they were talking about Marz was opening. That would have been like 2000, spring 2001. Marz was opening, and my friends Tim and them were talking about how dope he was, how he was like so good live. And I learned about Marz, how he had worked with Ministry. He'd recorded the same recording studio Wesley Willis had in Chicago, Ghetto Love. Wesley Willis actually has an album called Ghetto Love that's about the studio. So it's just everything's connected in that world. And Imagine Entertainment, who put out some Danzig records, had signed him to this really Procrustean unfair deal where he couldn't leave, but he told Jay and everyone that it was okay to leave. So Lung Fu Mo Shi came out on that label, even though I remember getting the Psychopathic Records sampler in 2001 that had samples that like saying that record was coming out, and it also had samples from the Dark Lotus and I think Blaze and stuff. But yeah, so like he had this mystery around him, and I'm sure like we're gonna talk about the group background. Yeah, so it's a super group. Ecocide is like the first Dark Lotus song,
right? And that just got ICP and Twiztid. But even before that, it was there. I think there was talks of other members. It's alleged that Misery was originally planned to be in the group from the beginning, because if I'm not mistaken, like Dark Lotus was being promoted like on the Hotline and in, press interviews as early as like 1998. And then, like you said, they did that Ecocide single, which had a very limited release, just ICP and Twiztid, was meant for the Tales from the Lotus Pod album. But that album ended up taking a long time. That song made its way onto Jekyll Brothers. Then there was talks. I mean, Isham was going to be in the group. Apparently they were talking about that in interviews, and that's confirmed, or seems to be confirmed, from the demo version of Bizarre's What. Isham has a verse that it's easy to find on YouTube, and he talks about how he's joined Dark Lotus.
Okay, wow.
It's possible that Vampiro is going to be involved in some capacity, as seen on Freak Show's Maniac Killer, Bizarre's My Homie Baby Mama, and the Forgotten Freshest Volume 3 outtake, When Vampiro Gets High. So, you had Misery, Isham, Vampiro possibly being additional members of Dark Lotus. But eventually, like you said, Marz came into the fold after Marz's band was on the second leg of the Bizarre tour. And then Blaze Your Dead Homie was added, I think maybe before Marz. And then boom, you had the original 6-member lineup of Dark Lotus.
That's what's up. And what's interesting about the title of the group, if we look at Buddhism, the Lotus Sutra is the prayer that kind of connotes the existence of karma and reincarnation. And the chant that a lot of Buddhists do, it goes, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That like they do that for hours. You can look on YouTube, there's Tina Turner doing that chant. And it means I devote myself to the Lotus Sutra of the wonderful law, which is the Lotus Sutra is the law of karma. So that Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, it has like that magic power of that chant. And I feel like I found out that chant, I was at this bar in like 2007 in Brooklyn, and I was talking to this dude, and he was like talking about Buddhism, and he gave me a card with it, and he's like, look this up, this might be helpful. And I've used that chant at times when I've been like meditating or like depressed. It always wakes me up to remind me that like my problems are small, things will be okay, and if you're kind and live like honorably, good things will happen. That chant has this weird power. And in the later Dark Lotus records, there are more references to that. Like there's that one record with all the Chinese emperor, all his soldiers, they found he'd made all these soldiers to protect him, made out of stone. And when he died, like thousands of years later, they buried it. They dug it up and found that he'd created this whole stone army. Is that the blood? Is that
Opaque Brotherhood? The Terracotta Army is on the cover.
That's what's up. So they have a lot of references to like Asian influences, and whereas like
it's
Malenko's,
a lot of
Middle
East
Eastern
meets West. Like that's a big theme. East meets West, like mysticism and Dark Lotus. And like there's a if you were to take it from like a hard, anybody who grew up like in a more evangelical Christian background, or, a product, maybe a more hardcore Protestant, or even, devout Catholic background, there's a fine line when mysticism and the esoteric becomes the occult. And a lot of people like in, a more evangelical, strict Christian background is really kind of hesitant to kind of delve too deep into Eastern mysticism. But of course, I mean, a huge theme in ICP's music is pluralism, right? And perennialism, and that there can be wisdom found in, many, many different religions and belief systems. So I guess this album is kind of indicative of that. It's an amalgamation of a lot of different belief systems, more specifically the esoteric and occult kinds. But there's a lot of that East meets West flavor.
Well, and like the whole ecumenical postmodern spirituality of hip hop is like a central point of KRS-One's teachings. Like if you read the Gospel of Hip Hop, it kind of shows that like hip hop as a culture presented this way to a way of mixing things together and then letting you pick your truth from it. But this whole like conceit of like the Cuisinart of spirituality is kind of dubious when it's like you have like dark, maybe potentially satanic themes in the mix, and they're really enjoying pressing that button on the Cuisinart. This record was a big influence on my Lars Attacks record, which was like my dark third record, which actually not to humble brag, but there's a song with KRS on it about that gospel hip hop book. And my song Super Scope is based on Headache, which we'll get to. But like the whole vibe of just like let's just see how extreme we can get, and like let's strip things down, because there's not a lot of like rap metal guitar. There's some guitar samples and stuff, but it's not really like a rap metal record like Juggalo Brothers, No,
it's really subtle. It feels more as part of the beat as rather than like an instrument being played over the beat.
Mikey Clark was going to produce the whole thing, but Fritz the Cat and Mike P finished the record. But what songs did Mikey Clark do? I guess we'll get to that, right?
So that's the thing, brother. The production credits, I have not to this day, and I've tried multiple times to find a reliable production credit for this album. I still can't. There's still a mystique behind it. I don't know if there's some, like, if you have like a membership to the ASCAP database, if you could, but it's not included anywhere. I mean, Behind the Paint, it doesn't go in detail. It just says Mike E. Clark started working on the album and then left after, shortly after. I don't think it mentions the number of songs or anything. And then it says Fritz the Cat came in and Mike P came in to finish as well. There's the number of like 4 songs around the internet being thrown out about how many Mike E. Clark produced, but I could not find any any way to truly verify that in a reliable way. But the production, even though there's a couple of cooks in the kitchen, it feels like very unison. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't feel like disjointed from beat to beat. They did a great job with that. The whole project sounds dope. The production is musically, it's so good. They really, again, doing that. You had mentioned how ICP kind of plays on the aesthetic of the unknown world, Egypt and, Arabia. Like, I think that this album really does that musically. Like, you got a lot of like Arabian sounding melodies, and Dark Lotus continued to do that after this album. So the production of this album is definitely a huge reason why it's such a classic.
People bought the CD. I remember like it peaked at number 1 on the Billboard Heat Seekers, number 6 on the top independent albums chart, and number 158 on the Billboard 200. So fools were looking for it, even though it didn't really have there's no music video. Like, I was stoked to find it at the record store, and it was like in the ICP section,
Just the mystique. I think that, ICP are promotional geniuses, and the mystique of that, what is Dark Lotus? I mean, we had mentioned like they only had 1 song out, but it was being talked about. It was mentioned on the Shaggy Show and Violent J's verse. I think, Jamie Madrox's verse and Blink. They did a really good job at hyping it up, and it was a few years that the name Dark Lotus was being thrown around until we actually got Tales from the Lotus Pod, and then you go into a store and look at the album again. It wasn't me. I came into, I got an ICP after this album came out, but I can only imagine a juggalo who is excited about it picks up the CD. It's all black on the, back. There's no track list. You open it up, there's no production credits. I can only imagine that the mystique kind of fueled that excitement, and probably a lot of word of mouth was a reason that this album was so successful, eh?
And then if you're poetically saying sayonara to your fading adolescence as you enter a new chapter,
right,
that darkness becomes a metaphor for light, in that maybe a young rapper from California would find some meaning and aesthetic guidance in his own storytelling. Jay says he doesn't really like listening to this record. It's too slow and dark. It reminds him of the difficult times surrounding the making of this record. I mean, there's a picture of him behind the paint where he just looked, he's as big as I've ever seen him. He's talking about how he was munching just whole boxes of NyQuils to fall asleep. Like, he was just, the panic attacks were getting crazy. Like, it was hard. So let's talk about the tracks. So track one, the intro. So it kind of highlights what we were talking about. It's spoken word intro with the ominous music, talking about the cycle of life and how within the cycle, one must choose between paths, which we know is a constant theme. That's every Joker's card kind of plays with that. It's such a great sound design on this introduction with like the fountain and then the screaming. It's one of the best intros of anything they've done. It really makes the point clear. Like, it's like, if you didn't get the last 5 Joker's cards, what's the point of them is, this is literally what we're talking about. You noticed something, and this is tight, about this "Shut Up Little Man" samples in the background, because we know ICP have always loved prank calls. They're always sampling them. They had the Jerky Boys on the last record. They sampled the Neil Hamburger Great Phone Calls. How did you notice this? And tell me what you know about this tape.
Yeah, for sure. So I found it out doing research for this. I found it out from Who Sampled, which is our main resource for finding out samples that, are used in the discography of Psychopathic Records. And I looked it up, and it's very fascinating because the Shut Up Little Man recordings are actually the recordings that these two dudes did. I guess they moved into an apartment, and their neighbors were always arguing, like, for real. Like, they're like, I guess they were drunk a lot of the times and just having these crazy arguments in real life, allegedly. Like, and there's an album of recordings of these, ridiculous arguments of these, drunk neighbors going back and forth.
There's a great documentary about this tape. There was a lot of questions of like, who owned the royalties to this, because it was such an underground phenomenon. There was like comic books made about it, but I'm trying to figure out how it ties into the intro. Did they just think it was funny?
Maybe they just kind of wanted some aggressive words in the background for effect. I'm not quite sure. I did want to say about the intro, speculation on my part, but I think the voice is Stefan, who is a guy who was working with Psychopathic during this era. He plays Sirius Darius in the JCW DVDs. His voice is, it sounds like Sirius Darius from JCW. So I'm assuming that this is Stefan on the intro. I don't know if any juggalos can confirm that or not.
And then Alibaba is Marz, kind of just like dominates on this song. This, like, he sounds so good on this. What I love about Marz is Marz is like his voice, his musicality, his tonality, his aggression, his like really like extreme rhymes and graphic. Like here on this song Alibaba, he has the altered text of Bornless Ritual, the preliminary invocation of the, how do you say that word? Gosha?
Yeah, Godia, Gosha. I'm not even sure, brother.
Right. Aleister Crowley, who was this occultist who Jimmy Page lived with up at Loch Ness, I guess, who was this like kind of like satanic British guy. And they have Marz like quoting that.
That's one of the first of several references to Aleister Crowley's work. So again, right off the bat in the intro of the first actual song, dealing with heavy duty occultism. Also, like, while he's saying that, Violent J can be heard with some backwards talking, backmasking. It's saying like within the Stonehenge, pyramids, Carnival, Egypt, Kadesh, which we're going to talk about because that's later referenced in the chorus. Kind of mystical kind of thing, just sprinkled in heavy duty right off the bat. apparently Marz, he says in an interview, we can link in the description, he brought like I think 2 duffel bags because he had a collection of occult books. So that was probably a huge part of like the specific occult references. Violent J also wrote about in a post promoted the album how he got a bunch of books off of his brother who acquired a bunch of these crazy occult books in like his time over in Saudi Arabia and the war and stuff. So it's wild, man.
So there's a line, shaketh the wilderness of Kadesh, which you say Kadesh is also referenced, backmast. That's from Psalm 29:8. And Kadesh is seen as one of the origin places of the Israelites. And geographically, it's supposed to be on the southern border of Canaan and the kingdom of Judah. So there you go, talking about like some ancient origins. And the unknown apocalypse of the 7 churches, you said is a reference to what from the book of Revelation?
Yeah, I think that's got to be a reference to the book of Revelation, because in that, Jesus has instructions for John of Patmos, who I think many believe is the Apostle John, to write to the 7 churches in, I forget what the 7 churches of, it's Turkey now. I'll put a note up where it is, but it's the 7 churches of a certain area. And, it's a part of Revelation, which is, the apocalyptic literature at the end of the Bible. So talking about the amalgamation of all kinds of esoteric things, exoteric things, we get Aleister Crowley references followed by the book of Psalms, followed by the book of Revelation. You know what I mean?
The amalgamation is also like purposefully the beginning and end of the Judeo-Christian religion, Kadesh, the birth of the Israelites, and then the book of Revelation, how the story begins and ends. And I mean, that's what's interesting, because it's like the 6 Jokers cards are ending, but they're also referencing the beginning. So it's like, I don't know, maybe that's totally reading into it academically, but I think that's tight. Like
100%, man. Who knows? Because this is an academic album in many ways.
Yeah, it's nerdcore. This is their nerdcore record. Track 3, Cripple and RAPE Me. It's just about how I remember this was on the sampler. It's about Jay's mental anguish. It's about everyone's mental anguish. But this beat was also on Forgotten Freshness Volume 3. That's right. Which you pointed out, I thought I recognized it. So I guess which do you think that they did first?
Well, actually, I had to double check, because in the Forgotten Freshness liner notes, it actually says the 2 beats that were on this album that were actually later found on Forgotten Freshness. That was just some late night studio sessions that Mikey Clark stripped the beat of the Dark Lotus song for Violent J to rap over, I think. So I think it was Dark Lotus first, and then Violent J just kind of had some fun with it later.
So Mikey Clark worked on this.
He worked on the Forgotten Freshness version, so that's a good point.
He had to have access to the files.
You're right. That could be a big clue that indicates the 2 beats that are found on Forgotten Freshness Volume 3. He did 100%. That's a good point.
Track 4, I Hurt Myself. I remember this was on the sampler too. It's a song about self-harm and someone who loves someone telling them not to hurt themselves. The illest thing on this song is I use this a lot in my lit hop classes. When Madrox does his verse, cut and slice away with a steak knife, the way he layers his voice has this, and I think I've talked about this before, it has this sort of modality of the tritone, which is where you take notes that have this purposeful, creepy sound. And we'll talk about how this works on Headache too, but like the way he layers his voice specifically on that verse is something that only Jamie Madrox can do. He's so musical with his flow. And it's like the reason, like Monoxide has such like a percussive, propulsive flow, but Madrox has the ability to just be so musical with his doubles. No one does doubles like him. And that verse on this, the way he does it, it's creepy. And it's just like, I don't know, man. It's a perfect example of how you can add musicality to your doubles. Call Upon Your Gods. Talk about this one.
Yeah, for sure. One of my favorite songs on the album. Basically, the theme of the song is how, a lot of people don't want to turn to God or religion until it's too late, whether they're on death row or facing, their mortality in some, intense way. And there is another reference to Aleister Crowley's Bornless ritual in the background of the second and third verse. Violent J can be heard reading elements of it. And each time they do it, like there's excerpts taken, but there is like slight changes. And there's a post I found online of Violent J promoting this album. Again, I'll link to it below. And he says in that post how like they make slight changes to these like incantations and rituals because they were afraid like there would be negative spiritual consequences. And you could say that is just a marketing ploy or whatever, but they really did, because if you look, especially with the Crowley references on this album, if you cross-reference them with the actual scripts, there are minor differences. So I just think that's crazy. But yeah, this song is very dope, and also kind of has, going back to that kind of like more like those Egyptian scales and stuff, kind of has that Middle Eastern vibe sonically. Love this song. Might be my favorite on the album.
I think and the way Monoxide starts his verse, help me now, as I can't understand why I'm talking about. Like, that still sticks in my head. And we danced. The next track, this example of this is Jay's verse is just like so weird. He's copying the synth and the bass in such a creative, bizarre way. Like, it still sounds cool because it's balances off everyone's like what everyone else is doing.
Totally. I agree, man. Like, it really feels like they were in the studio together the whole time working on this album. Yeah. Like, it's not just like, guys coming in at the studio. Okay, I'm going to put my 16 here. Like, it definitely feels like a very tight collaborative effort front to back. I couldn't agree more.
So track 7 and 8, they're not my favorites. Black Magic and Gimme That Blood.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I don't hate them. Tell me what you think about them.
So, well, Black Magic, honestly, it might be one of my favorite songs. One of the darker songs on the album. I mean, it has some of the most intense references to the occult and paranormal phenomenon. But they kind of use the darkness to kind of point people towards the light. And because the chorus is like rebuking and resisting black magic, right, the whole time. So I just think that that's super dope. And I also wanted to say that Violent J's verse, even though it's a totally different vibe sonically, Violent J's verse, like, he's really talking about all kinds of like paranormal phenomenon as evidence of there's something more than what we see in the physical world. And that kind of reminds me of the song Miracles. If you look, you know what I mean? Like, if you listen to the format of his verse, it really reminds me of Miracles again. Miracles is a much lighter sounding song, but I just kind of think they have that in common. They also have that dig, Solomon dig. Solomon was, of course, King Solomon of the Bible, King David's son. He was the one who built the first Jewish temple. And I mean, he is a significant figure in Christianity, right? But he's also a significant figure in the occult and Freemasonry, right? Because of his involvement in building the temple. He's like, I guess, looked at as like a super OG Mason. And there's lots of, he's known for his wisdom, and there's lots of, occult, books that deal with Solomon, because there's lots of kind of like apocrypha of how Solomon kind of because of his search of wisdom, kind of went to the dark forces to do so, the lesser key of Solomon and stuff like that. So just randomly, they just say, dig, Solomon, dig. Whose idea was that? How did that make it in there? It's such a dense reference that they just drop and move on, like, it's crazy. Solomon
digging for knowledge or occult, like stratification. I mean, that line always stuck out to me. A dig, Solomon, dig. It had to come from something. I also want to say a line that I stole from this. The line, I thought this was such a great rhyme because I'd always been in the church for years, the crucifer, carrying the cross during all the Sunday services for years. That was my job.
I didn't know that.
Never thought. Yeah, like in high school, middle school. So I never thought about how Lucifer and Crucifer rhyme. Heckle, Meckel, Heckle, Lucifer, Heckle, Meckel, Crucifer. So in the Roommate from Hell, my first song with MC Chris, I say, someone called his name was Lucifer. Someone called the priest and bring the crucifer. Right. And that rhyme came from this. So
nice.
I don't know if anyone knows that song, but that's the origin of that. I remember someone came up to me and was like, that's a really evil thing to say crucifer. Are you saying that you're a crucifier? And I'm like, no, the crucifer is someone who carries the cross. Like some fan asked me that at a show. You're right. This song is doper than I remember. It's important.
I did want to say, there is probably this song contains some of the most extensive backmasking, and I was able to find it. I think it was DC Fago guys. He did a YouTube video for the Carnival Spirits channel. That was who I've referenced for this. And in the beginning, the words are, I think it's Violent J saying magician, sorceress, witch doctors, black magic. So again, all heavy duty occult stuff. Later on in the song, there's an explicit message about the 6 Jokers card. It says the 6 Jokers card will be followed. And then there's a little pause. It will be followed by the end of time itself. Little pause. It will consume us all. And then at the end of the song, the reverse message says, may God bless Mikey, Clark, ICP, Twiztid, and most of all juggalos and everybody at Psychopathic Records, even you. So again, backmasking a message that is actually kind of, monotheistic in nature and not satanic, right?
Yeah. That's the irony of this. Like, it's like the whole thing with ICP is like, oh, are they evil? And you dig deeper and they're like, nah, not really. They're actually the opposite. What's the line? What's the backmask thing where he's like, F the devil, we don't play that? What's that?
And that's an Echo Side. You're right. That's very similar to this, where it's like like you said, like F the devil, right? Like we believe in God legit or something like that. Yeah, there's like a pro God backmasking in Echo Side, I think too.
Gimme That Blood is their vampire raps, which is fun. This song is just fun.
This is kind of a more upbeat song, similar to like, and we dance. We do get these like small breaks where it is still the wicked shit, but it's just like a little less heavy, you know what I mean? And slow. And this, one of the more upbeat songs that like Monoxide's part where he's just like, Shadowcast or Phantasma, and I want to take a drink of your plasma. Like, it's just so powerful and dope. I used to love that line. I still do. I just, every time that comes on, even if I'm not singing along with the lyrics, I'm singing along to that line.
Yeah, that's one of Monoxide has some very clever lines. That's one of them. Totally. My heartbeat bumping like an 808, right? Yes. That's that verse. That's tight. Also, Marz is like saying, he says on this F religion. And then Jay responds, goes, what? Or someone goes, what? Like, right.
There is definitely a voice that goes, what? And Marz in his interview with Rapzilla said that he had a lyric that, Twiztid was actually uncomfortable with. This, I thought, could be the lyric because, it's like F religion. It talks about, I think it even references burning down a church. So if there's a lyric that could make someone uncomfortable, it could be this.
And this was like in the same decade or slightly after the church burning in Norway with Mayhem and Burzum and all that stuff. The evil version of Kiss. They actually kill each other. They actually burn down churches. So if you're going to then put that on a Psychopathic album, people are going to be like, okay.
Totally, man. And the irony of it, like Marz has probably one of the most like satanic lines in this song, but then he became the most devout religious, out of all of them, totally born again Christian.
That's what's up. Headache. So I talked about how I referenced this on Superscope. I just want to talk about that song Superscope. I wrote that song because I was like, I finished the Robot Kills record. I was like so creatively drained. I didn't know what I wanted to say. I didn't know if I was going to stop doing MC Lars. I had problems with like nerdcore because I felt like it was homogenous. It was like not very diverse. People weren't really giving props to the history of hip hop, and everyone wanted their 15 minutes. So I said that it was like potentially problematically racist, and that if you didn't respect the originators of rap, like that was an issue. If you only listened to like MC Chris and Frontalot and me, that was going to limit people, and that like if you didn't work on your production and your skills, you were going to be forgotten. So there were a lot of people who started doing MC Lars nerd rap diss songs, which was new for me. So I have a verse on that song I'm getting diss songs wrote by kids online at home. Guess that makes me a real rapper. Look how my garden's grown, right? That's the bridge. And the verse is like, they try to tear me down. It's like thinking about all the negative energy that you get thrown at you for trying to do what's right and like speak your truth can be you can get away from it if you're able to process it and talk about it. So it's different lyrics, but like Headache is about just all the negativity of like a mental breakdown of like hearing voices in your head. And so my song was a reference to this. And what I liked about this song is it showed an example of what ICP does so well, them referencing old school hip hop, talking about paying homage to the origin. And you had a note about this. They referenced Raising Hell, which was on the 6 million album selling Run DMC record. That was their breakthrough. They had Tricky and their Aerosmith collab. But I didn't know this sample until like a few months later after I first heard this record. I was doing my show in college and I was playing songs from Raising Hell and I cut the head off the devil and I throw it at you. I was like, oh, that is so dope that they referenced it. But when I listened to this Dark Lotus song, I thought they'd wrote that line. But the fact that it was referencing Run DMC was even doper to me because Run DMC was such a influential band on hip hop and rock coming together. And that record is like the definitive album of that genre. So there was a lot of reasons why I wanted to sample it, but I also like the tritone. This is an example of like the chorus thing that Jamie does on the other song. It's a music theory. So it's a musical interval where you have 3 adjacent whole tones, 6 semitones. So if you have F, you'd have F to G, G to A to B, and you have the adjacent whole tones, and it has this kind of like purposefully demonic, scary sound. And it's like da 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 da.
Right.
Da da. The way they layer it, they're all doing that. And I don't know if it's conscious, but like musically, that's what's so amazing about this chorus because it's so unsettling. And Absolutely. Then they have that sample. So that's my Headache breakdown. Anything you want to add, Snax?
Dude, I think you said it perfectly, man. It's such a great song, you know, as opposed to them kind of like using these occult forces and, you know, rituals and, you know, spells. They're actually fighting against the dark powers and resisting them. And this one, similar to the chorus of Black Magic, because they're kind of, you know, fighting off demonic possession. And I totally agree. It's incredibly chilling, one of the scariest songs on the album, and also one of my favorites.
Bad rep. They talk about being lonely and how they're actually kind of like, this reminds me Behind the Paint, which was
right.
Behind the Paint was before this, right? The song Behind the Paint from
Bizarre, yeah.
When you see that side of the Juggalo stuff, it's like, that's the interesting thing we were talking about earlier with Don Quixote about the gap between reality and illusion. And when you have a little glimpse into the reality of these characters, it's like really, it's effective and it's dope and it makes the fantasy even more interesting. So then they turn 180-degree turn on B-tch I'm Sexy about why they're sexy.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, a total juxtaposition from the last song, you know, about, you know, they're not getting much love. And then boom, you know, they're talking about how they actually, in fact, have a lot of sex appeal. This song is so funny.
So it's, you know, I always put ICP to task for their misogyny and stuff. Someone commented on one of the videos like, we get it, Lars, you're such a good person. But every time they do something that I'm always like, I don't know, this shouldn't be disrespecting women, but it's worth saying. Like, if I'm going to like ride for ICP and like go hard on why I love the Juggalo stuff, I'm also going to talk about how the 17 version of me isn't the 39-year-old version of me, and that like I some things haven't aged well with that. This song is one of them. Swarm. There's a swarm of them. Let's talk about this one. I'll let you talk about it.
Word, dude. So yeah, this song is really just kind of talking about, you know, Dark Lotus is the swarm, really, because they're talking about their powers and how they can use them, some of the nefarious things they can do. Definitely paints them more in the villain you know, category on this track. Plenty more occult references, including the chorus. We get the you know, I believe the final explicit reference to Aleister Crowley's work. It contains elements of his Mass of the Phoenix. So again, just explicit reference to one of the most famous occultists of all time.
When my 18-month-old son, like when we leave a room or like he's playing with an elephant toy or like the Yoshi toy you gave him, and like we go to another room, he'll be like, bye Yoshi, see you. Like he says that. So at this point, I'm like, bye Aleister Crowley, see you. I've had enough of your garbage, man. Get out of here with that.
Yeah, man. Aleister
I'm just
Crowley.
not feeling him.
I'm not feeling hell no. I know that you mentioned a lot of times you have difficulty with like the misogyny and stuff in ICP's music.
Yeah.
And maybe I should take bigger issue with that too than I do. I guess I can shrug that off like I do the violence. Like it's just part of the entertainment, part of the characters they play. But man, this album is challenging for me when they're, explicitly, referencing Aleister Crowley's work and stuff. Like it's hard for me to get behind that in any form or fashion, especially because I mean, yes, there's a lot of cautionary tale elements on this album, but there's a lot of times where they're just using it for the darkness factor. And, Aleister Crowley, he can go suck a lemon. He's a character in my album, The Esoteric Journey of a Cemetery Groundskeeper. He's actually one of the kind of like antagonists that the main character, Nathan Schultz, meets in the afterlife to try and throw him off his path. And I do not look fondly on him. You know what I mean? I know that some people in the occult world are well-intentioned, but that dude got some gnarly stuff in his works, man. And I don't think he should be looked up to or glorified in any way. That's right.
Have you heard my Aleister Crowley song I did for Patreon? I don't know if you've heard that one.
I don't think so, dude.
I have a line. I say, I abjure myself from the dark arts proudly. That means you, Mr. Aleister Crowley. That's like the chorus.
Nice. Dude, I got to listen to that, man. I feel bad that I haven't heard it. That's fresh.
If anyone wants to hear that, patreon.com/MC Lars. I Want to Die, track 13, talks about what happens after death. Now, this is a common trope for ICP. The chorus this is one of the more melodic choruses, like with the little keyboard. But Blaze's verse sticks out because he's already died. The Crows is tight, using birds as a metaphor for something scary. I mean, Poe did that too, right? The Raven, birds are inherently
Alfred Hitchcock with birds.
Yeah, because they are like symbols for the souls, for the afterlife. They fly between. They do things that we can't. So this was like a creepy song that does stand out. Yeah.
For sure. And I love the beat. It's really sparse. I think it's really well placed on the album, third to last song, second to last if you don't count .com. And they're just kind of like ominously talking about how they're haunted by crows. Like you said, it could be there's a lot of mental illness themes on this album, and this could be looked at as just people who are paranoid. But it could also be that, these crows really are kind of stalking these characters and, causing them a lot of distress. And the chorus going back to the back and forth between esoteric and exoteric, occult, and then, more mainstream Christianity. The chorus seems to be kind of like a dark carnival version of the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah. And then we get to Juggalo Family, which, this is the kind of record, sometimes you can play, those who watch this are obviously fans of ICP. There are certain albums you can play to get people into ICP. This album isn't one that I don't know. I found I've never been able to win people over with this record. Not that I do anymore, but when I was in high school, especially in college, people were not trying to hear this record because this song is just so weird. It's but it hits on all the aesthetic things that Juggalos like it's a family song, melodic chorus. It's about why they believe in each other, why they love each other. But the chorus is so weird. But Juggalos, you put this on for Juggalos, they'll go crazy because it's everything they love that people who hate ICP's music dislike. You know what I'm saying?
100%, dude. It's the quintessential Juggalo anthem. Going back to, Monoxide, how, he's used melody on this album, his verse, so many people in the Matrix die alone. Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, so dope. It's a touching song. And again, you're right. A non-Juggalo will listen to this song and be like, man, how is this song making you emotional? And it's just you don't understand, even though dude, it's always perplexed me. And I know I'm a Juggalo, so it's hard for me to imagine not loving this music, but horror is such a big thing. You know what I mean? Horror movies are huge. And I know in music, horror has been, well received in heavy metal and even in rap more so these days. And even in the 90s, it had some success with Grave Diggers and 3 6 Mafia. But there are some albums in Psychopathic Records that like I feel like a fan of horror would just enjoy. Like Hell's Pit, for example, would be one. I think some songs on this would be one. You know what I mean? Like if you're a fan of horror, check out what these masters of horror rap can do. But you're right, it's usually a hard sell. It's not easy to get people into it, you know?
I mean, it's like any underground music, and that's what makes it dope. So .com. So this was unique because I'd never heard anything like this. And this was ICP and everyone's way of showing we see you. It's like a way of early version of shouting out the Kickstarter supporters, right? Like we see you. Here's a CD we reference all your stuff. And it sampled Snow Creatures by Quincy Jones, which was later found on the track Superstar from Forgotten Freshness 3. And they shout out Juggalo websites. Like, it's interesting how many of those places went away, like Juggalos in Germany.de. Now it's just Facebook, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the era, you know, where people were just posting web pages. That was your way to get out there, you know, and there was so many of them. And I think you're right. It's so cool that they did that. They shouted them out and acknowledged them in this way. I just imagine, I mean, some of those sites had to be like so small, and like, imagine, you know, you're doing that website, you know, you got a job on the side, just something you do to give props to Psychopathic. And then you get this album, bro, you hear .com and your website is mentioned. Like, dude, what? Imagine the feeling you would have got, right?
Trick Daddy did www.thug.com in 1998 with like an old school web browser. I think it's worth showing that album. That was like the first time I'm hearing rap reference .com nerdy stuff. But, it's fun because it's like, wow, the internet's different now. Let's wrap it up. So the aftermath. Dark Lotus is one of the most beloved Psychopathic Records supergroups amongst the Juggalos, having dropped some of the most beloved releases in the entire discography. The last thing I'm going to say is that, like, about Marz. So I'd been doing the MC Lars for like 6 or 7 years, but when Marz was, everyone was talking about how dope Marz was, I was like, that's a cool rapper name. Like, maybe if I go more into hip hop, I can use the Lars name because it had a cool kind of sound. So I was like, Marz inspired me to keep the Lars because I thought it sounded tight.
Even if you're not a Christian, like, it is really fascinating to hear Marz talk about his time in the music industry and the things he was into, the experiences he had, and his perspective now from a born again Christian. I'll link below to the interview where he actually briefly mentions bringing like all the duffel bags of, you know, occult books to the studio for this album. But, you know, all the best to Marz. Because he's clearly a talented dude. Black Rain was next. ABK joined. After the revised version where ABK replaced Marz, he actually joined Dark Lotus and was on their album Black Rain. That's great. Opaque Brotherhood is great. The Mud, the Water, Air, and Blood, like, that's like, all the albums are great. You know what I mean? And we'll have those. As far as the future of Dark Lotus, it's definitely in the air. And again, not looking good, you know, the way things are for obvious reasons that we won't get into. But who knows what will happen in the future. As far as what was next for Psychopathic Records, like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, it was very much like a time of transition. They were finishing up their time with Island Records. You know, they were, you know, they took a break from working with Mikey Clark, and they were beginning to work heavily with Mike P and Fritz the Cat. And on top of all this, it was going to be time to do the 6 Jokers card, which we already did that episode, but that's very important. This album, you know, was pre-Wraith.
It's like the MC movie. That's like Black Widow, the MCU movies that come out that say something that already happened.
Yeah, exactly.
So to find out what's next, watch our Endgame episode. So is ABK only on Black Rain, but not the Opaque Brotherhood or the rest?
That's right. Yeah, he had a feature on the Mud, Water, Air, and Blood, but he wasn't on. He's not like, he wasn't in the group for Opaque Brotherhood or that album.
So there's only 4 Dark Lotus records. Well, 5 if you count version 2 of this one.
I
think the best way to sum up the Dark Lotus debut is Kimberly Chun's review in the San Francisco Chronicle. She said it's a mixture of dub, goth, metal, shock rock, and hip hop with a WWF announcer's delivery and shuffling stoner beats thrown in for good measure. That's like how the mainstream saw this. But meanwhile, we could talk for an hour and 40 minutes about like what it meant to us as spiritual beings. Kimberly Chun, like, shout out to you for giving them press. But if you want to sit down with us and talk about the ABK version of this record, let's do an episode. We're going to hit you up.
Dude, it's so funny reading those reviews because, like, you know, the Hell's Pit review, for example, on All Music, like that's one of my all-time favorite albums. And it's just like, it just goes, it speaks to the subjectivity of music because you read the review and it's just basically tearing the album to shreds. And it's like, how aren't you hearing what I'm hearing? You know what I mean?
Well, that, and seeing how the mainstream press like decimated ICP after their whole explosion with Malenko and stuff, made me realize that like, oh, like who cares what the mainstream press says? Yeah, ICP is just one of those controversial bands. Now they're the legacy band that's like figureheads for diversity and inclusion and all this stuff, and like it's okay to be weird. And I think that's kind of cool how they found their place. But this is a special record, and I'm glad you invited me on, Snax.
Oh, dude, like I said at the beginning, couldn't have done it without you. And man, this is a great episode. Thanks for sharing your personal experiences with it and all of your lit hop knowledge as well, brother.
Thanks for all your research. These notes, the notes that we read are like 90% Snax. I just dropped in my references to my own music throughout. Thanks for watching this episode of Hatchet Chat. I'm MC Lars.
I'm MC Snax, y'all. Whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop.